But I just wanted to thank you all for joining us today for NAFAKA's final learning event on fortification. We're extremely excited and honored to be presenting some of the accomplishments that our team and project was able to achieve during this effort. So before I get started, I just want to encourage you all to go ahead and introduce yourselves using the text box. Let us know where you're coming from, where you're joining from. And then I'd also like to kindly remind you to keep your microphones off during the duration of the presentation. That way we can ensure that we have a smooth transition. And please go ahead and submit any comments or questions also using the chat box. That way we will be able to address them and get to your comments and questions during the Q&A session at the end of this webinar. So with that being said, I would like to welcome all of you again on NAFAKA's fortification event. NAFAKA is a USAID Tanzania Feed the Future program implemented by ACDIVOCA since 2016 up until the end of this month in 2021. The NAFAKA program has focused on improving the rice and maize value chains, productivity, profitability, as well as the nutrition aspect in the southern western highlands of Tanzania. And so for this very specific aspect of NAFAKA's work, the team had been working with small and medium scale millers to increase the quantity of maize flour that is fortified. And that is the subject that we will be presenting on today. So if we can go over to slide 2. This is our agenda for today. So we will be hearing from Andrew Reed with USAID on some opening remarks. And then we will hear from Mwita Wawe from the President's Office Regional Administration and Local Government, otherwise known as Theo Larg, and then or Raj, and then we will hear from Alyssa Brody. She's our nutrition specialist at ACDIVOCA. Up next, we will hear about some of the challenges and opportunities from Silas, who is our current NAFAKA Chief of Party. And then we will also hear once again from Alyssa about opportunities for scale. We're also extremely excited to have Felix Brooks Church, who is the CEO and founder of Sanku, and we will get to hear about opportunities for scale from their perspective. And then finally, we'll have some final remarks from Paul Songwe, who is from the Prime Minister's office. And as I mentioned, we will have a Q&A session. So joining us today, we also have James Flock, who was NAFAKA's former Chief of Party. He's still a member of ACDIVOCA's family, just no longer under NAFAKA. So thank you all very much for joining us today. And without any further ado, I would like to hand the presentation over to Andrew Reed for our opening remarks. Again, Andrew is USAID Tanzania's Deputy Director of Economic Growth, and we're extremely excited to have you here. So thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much. I'll try to keep my camera on while I speak here. Yeah, mine will be very quick. This has been a great program. Anybody that knows me has known that I've been a huge supporter of NAFAKA for the last 3 years since I've been working in Tanzania. I've got to work very closely with Jim and with Silas, with the Home Office. It's been an excellent experience and a great program, and particularly this portion on the food fortification. I think it's been one of the most innovative ways to bring nutrition into a program that works with staple crops, especially something like maize. It's a little bit tricky where USAID, at the beginning of the Feed the Future initiative, really put the emphasis on nutrition. It was really, as an important aspect of our programming. And then when you look at something like a maize program that works largely with maize or staple crops, you don't have a lot of the micronutrients coming in, and then then there are issues there still can be issues with the nutrition. And this is an activity that has done so many things. It's figured out a way to improve the nutrition content of the maize flour that people are already consuming, and other flours as well. But not only that, they went the next step to be able to look at, okay, where do people can, purchase their maize, and people that our target clients, who are these very rural clients, where are they purchasing that maize? And so it might be that a lot of countries, and we do see this, there's lots of fortified maize in the city centers, but that's not where people are shopping. And so this working partnership with Sanku, to be able to go out and take a private sector driven model to be able to fortify flour in remote areas is honestly, it's something that I hope more and more missions across the world are able to pick up this model and be able to move with it, because I'm very, very supportive of it. And I think it's just been an excellent model, an excellent way to really do the things that we're setting out to do. And I would also commend the NAFAKA and everyone involved with including the schools, making these linkages with the schools and the maize processors. What another important aspect of the program. And it aligns perfectly with USAID Tanzania's current CDCS and our emphasis on youth. And, how are we able to better serve youth, that next generation who's going to come up and be able to take over these types of activities and other things within a country. And what a great way to do that by, targeting school children, making sure that they have the tools that they need, i.e. the proper nutritional content and a full stomach to be able to study, have a reason, another reason to be able to attend school and be able to go out and, be a productive member of society. So lots to say there. I'm very, very sad to see the NAFAKA program leaving. I'm very glad that we've set up these series of meetings to be able to get some of the information out there. And I just look forward to, seeing these types of initiatives continue on long after NAFAKA ends. So thank you very much, and all the best on a great event here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andy. It's always an honor to hear from you and the mission. So up next, we're expecting to have Mwita from the President's office. However, I believe that we are having some internet connections. So in order to keep the presentation moving, I will hand it over to Alyssa.
Great. Thank you so much, Louisa and Andrew, for those opening remarks. So jumping right in, I wanted to talk first about the precipice for fortification activities. So malnutrition, like across the world, remains an issue in Tanzania, with a prevalence of 34% of children under 5 stunted or with chronic malnutrition. And this is even higher in the zone of influence in the areas that the NAFAKA project was working. And we are working with prevalences from 33 to 42%. And contributing to that was a lack of dietary diversity or poor diets. And what we see is that around 80% of the calories of diets of people in Tanzania is actually coming from maize, right? And so that is, as Andy alluded to, is not a super nutrient dense food. So unfortunately, we are missing out on critical micronutrients in the diets when so many people are consuming so much maize. So what did this mean for NAFAKA? Well, as I just mentioned, NAFAKA was working in areas of high malnutrition, but we are also working along the maize value chain. And so we knew we were working with these producers, these processors, who were having these important touch points with the maize, and also working with the people who are producing the maize and likely consuming a large part of it, right? And so we started to think, well, is there a way that we can improve the diets of this really important staple crop for so many people? And fortunately, Sanku had been working in Tanzania and had developed a fortification technology and a fortification model that was appropriate to the needs of Tanzanian millers. Now, I'm going to go through the model really quick, and Sanku, please let me know later on. Felix, let me know later on if you have any clarifications. But Sanku's model was really interesting in that they cracked a bit of a nut, and they were working with millers to be able to procure these bags that millers were adding their maize flour to. And what they did was they bundled the bags with the premix, the fortification premix that is added during the milling process. And what that did was it eliminated the cost of fortification, which of course in fortification activities all around the world is a big issue of getting consumers to pay for this added benefit. So the millers are able to buy these bags and have the fortification premix bundled with that purchase. Of course, they also have the fortification technology, or the dosifier, which is able to be outfitted to the mill that the miller is using, and adds the correct amount of micronutrients to the maize that passes through this dosifier and automatically will fortify. And so importantly, that then leaves consumers with a bag of fortified maize flour that they're able to purchase at the exact same price they were able to buy their maize flour for. And so given that NAFAKA was working with processors, it seemed like a really nice fit in working with Sanku. So beginning in 2018, NAFAKA and Sanku started to work together to think about how they could scale up this model in NAFAKA ZOI. So NAFAKA facilitated grants to Sanku, as well as Sanku had their own distribution activities in the NAFAKA ZOI to install these dosifiers. And the dosifiers here is shown here on your right. NAFAKA focused initially more heavily on the maize production areas, given that there are more millers in these areas. After the installation of the dosifier, NAFAKA would support millers via technical assistance, via technical trainings to adhere to good manufacturing practices, regulatory standards, and improve marketing and branding. And we are working with these regulatory bodies here. And then at the end of 2018, NAFAKA and Sanku had been working with 38 millers to produce around 4,700 metric tons of fortified maize flour. But implementing good CLA practices, NAFAKA started to question, well, what is the desirability for this fortified maize flour, or FMF, as I might say for the rest of the presentation? These consumers are, of course, our main target for these fortification activities. So what is their desirability? How can we get them to really swap out their regular maize flour for this FMF? And then the other question we had was, what was the penetration of FMF from these processors in peri-urban and urban areas to these last mile areas? And as Andrew mentioned, these are the populations that most often are forgotten and most often are the ones that have higher rates of malnutrition. So what could we be doing to make sure that fortified maize flour is getting back into the communities that have lower dietary diversity? So we implemented two assessments in 2018 and 2019 to look into those two questions. We conducted a barrier analysis to design SBC activities to increase the demand for FMF. And what we wanted to do was understand the determinants of FMF consumption and understand what were the barriers and the motivators for people to increase their consumption of this. And we found that perceived social norms, access, negative and positive consequences, as well as self-efficacy were influential. So we used these findings to design SBC activities such as SMS, radio, community mobilization, but also use these determinants shown here to design nutrition messages that across the programming, we knew we had this set of nutrition messages that we could use for sensitization. We also did a last mile willingness to pay study to look at how we could adapt our marketing strategies to work with these millers in peri-urban and urban areas to try to get the fortified maize flour back out into the rural areas. And this we found had to be quite differentiated between the rice production areas versus the maize production areas. Because in the maize production areas, people are producing their own maize and then they're consuming that for the next year. So getting people to go and buy prepackaged fortified maize flour, which was in line with the approach that we'd been taking, didn't quite make sense because they had their own stocks that they wanted to use. But we did find that when giving them a question of, would you pay for fortification to have your own maize fortified in your village at your posho mill, would you do it? And we did find that there was a willingness to pay for this after there was the sensitization on the benefits of FMF. We also find that in the rice areas that people wanted to buy this FMF. They're already going and buying bagged maize, but they wanted to buy the fortified maize flour, or that pink bag that you might see here in the presentation. So taking those learnings and taking obviously the strong results from 2018, NAFAKA and SANCU continued to scale up the fortification activities. And this was, of course, by increasing access to the fortification technology to increase it to more millers, but also taking the results and applying them from our research questions. We started to work with millers to adapt their marketing approaches. So we here in this box here, supported millers via capacity building on their different marketing approaches, as well as with kind of business to business meetings with schools so that they could establish contracts with schools, and the schools were able to procure fortified maize flour instead of maize flour. We also supported the millers not only to supply to schools, but also to supply to other social programs such as hospitals and prisons. And then, as I just mentioned, of course, last mile areas were an important part for us. So specifically working with millers that were in the rice areas or near the rice areas, we worked with them to diversify their marketing strategies, think about the opportunities of these vendors or dukas in last mile areas, and establish connections with them. And then a really important COVID-19 adaptation activity was to do a temporary installation of the dosifier technology in last mile villages. And this was called the Fortification Roadshow. And the reason NAFAKA did this was given that with COVID-19, we saw the school closures across the ZOI. And of course, a lot of those students had previously been receiving FMF via the school feeding contracts, but now we're no longer receiving that. Of course, also, we saw that dietary diversity, nutrition decreased during COVID. And so what NAFAKA wanted to do was pilot the learnings from the willingness to pay and install a dosifier in these mills in the last mile areas where millers could, or where producers could bring their own maize stocks right after the harvest season, bring their own maize stocks and have it all milled and all fortified right in their own village. And with that, of course, paying the additional charge for the premix, which was around 86 cents for 20 kilograms of maize flour. And then across these interventions, NAFAKA implemented our SBC activities, which included radio, SMS, community mobilization, and equipping public, private sector actors with these activities and these messages. So getting into the results from the last 3 years of programming, NAFAKA and SANCU ended up working with 93 millers in the ZOI to produce FMF. And there were roughly 21,000 metric tons of FMF produced over the 3 years. And if we calculate what this could be if an individual were to replace all of their maize flour with fortified maize flour, this actually reaches over 160,000 consumers, which of course is quite a bit. We also supported 25 millers to obtain the Tanzania Bureau for Standards mark, which allows them to be able to sell to schools. With the model-specific results, there were 230 schools that were serving FMF, and this is estimated to reach 92,000 students. With the last mile distribution, millers set up contacts with around 116 last mile vendors selling the FMF. And we have continued to see this grow. And in interviews with these millers, they see this as an important and untapped market for them. The Fortification Roadshow was done in 11 sites. and a total of 38.5 metric tons of FMF was produced for 652 producers. And importantly for them, it wasn't just bringing or having 20 kgs, it was them bringing their entire stock. So that's likely something that's going to last them 6 to 8 to 10 months. And having it fortified, of course, is beneficial. And then for some of the SBC results, we did find that 24% of NAFAKA participants knew what FMF was, and that 100% of those were able to recite a benefit of FMF. And we actually think the percentage of participants knowing what FMF is higher in the fortification areas. The fortification activities weren't implemented in the entirety of the ZOI, so we think this is likely a bit skewed. And then, of course, really important is the willingness to pay, which is going to be important to consider for scaling up these activities in the future. And 100% of the consumers leaving the roadshow said that they are willing to pay for this, and that 93% of them said that they would like to see the dosifier installed permanently in their village. For mass media, around 29,000 SMS messages were sent to producers. 12 radio campaigns that lasted a month happened over the 3 years of the program. And the activity also implemented 30 radio talk shows, which were about an hour long and included key influencers who could talk about their experience with FMF. And as far as the private sector interest in some of the mass media, 61% of the Dukas and 52.6% of the Millers said that their sales increased after the radio, SMS, and poster campaigns. And of those that said their sales increased, 70 to about 90% said that they are interested and will look into continuing these efforts in the future with their own funds, but in collaboration with the government. So showing some sustainability there of continued SBC efforts. For community mobilization, we found that the community leaders, specifically the community health workers, were the most preferred and most impactful disseminators of nutrition messages. And we saw this specifically when we did the roadshow and tested out the different models. And with that, I will hand it over to Silas, our COP, to talk about some lessons learned.
Thanks, Alisa. On the following slides, I'll take you through the lessons learned. And yes, here I will share on various aspects where, yes, might be include collaboration with LGA, government agencies, but also, yes, investment with the private sector. Starting with the standards, NAFAKA worked with local government authorities and CIDO, Small Industry Development Organization, and supported the premise legislation, but also good manufacturing practice compliance. And this had to do with miller processing flow, but also registration. This was trade registration through the local government trade officers. So the lesson we draw here that yes, collaboration among LGA and government agents such as CIDO can increase production in terms of millers who are doing fortification, but also increase compliance of those millers since it's also a government requirement. And this is compulsory. Number two was meeting the Tanzania Bureau of Standard mark. Again, through TBS, CIDO, collaboration can fast track support collecting the fortified maize flour samples from millers and assist the product quality legislation. This is a lesson since some of the millers, yes, attain TBS mark, but to a lesser extent. Some of them tried, but you find the sample might be rejected due to delay or storage. So here again, through TBS and CEDO, these are government agencies, we see that they can fast track this aspect so that we increase number of millers who attain a standard mark on their product. Another aspect was Alisa spoke on the fortified maize bag. This bag has to have a fortification national logo. And if there isn't a control, it means that you find in the market fake or counterfeit bags. However, this also was curbed through SANCU collaboration with TBS, and now there is enough control of the fake bags, and so that the market can be sure that the flour they consume is really fortified. Another aspect which we include in the lessons learned was community readiness to pay. And here was through the rural fortification pilot, which again, Lisa have shared about this. We realized that the rural communities are able to pay an addition of T shillings, 200 T shillings up to 400 T shillings for a 20 kilogram tin milling at the local posho mill, where SANCU had installed the dosifier. So this is again a lesson that there is community readiness to pay for fortified maize milling services. Another aspect is leverage of investment. Through NAFAKA grants, the grants were meant to leverage technology, which is the dosifier, and the starter kit. The starter kit covered the, premix 50 kilograms, the branded packaging material, which is a bag with a national logo, but also, the design that was actually through BBS, design or upgrading of the presentation of the product or the milling blending process. So through this, we realized that later on, the millers came themselves. There was no need for a grant anymore. We gave a grant to 37 millers, for instance, but later through SANCU, 56 of the millers went to fetch for the dosifier and other services. Another aspect is actually a desire for the private sector millers to adopt fortification. And I've spoken about these 56 millers who went to SANCU to fetch for the dosifier and the other services without our grant. So this is an indication that even the private sector milling enterprises are ready to continue with production of fortified maize flour. Another aspect, this was spoken also by Alisa, the social behavior change. What was an impact on these radio programs, talk shows, which was a mix of radio programs and the SMS? One miller, for instance, in Songwe, reported the sales of 1 metric ton during the same talk show process in Mlowo in Songwe. So this is an indication that through social behavior change, it can trigger demand and also increase sales of fortified maize flour and consumption. Also, NAFAKA innovated, this was an innovation to design a village-based nutrition agents model. And these were last mile vendors connected to the millers as agents, as what Alisa was saying about Duka. These are rural Dukas who were linked with the millers, and NAFAKA here was trying to respond to the local government question that how this fortified maize flour will reach rural areas. So through the barrier analysis, which has been spoken by Alisa, we are able to design the last mile supply of fortified maize flour. And yes, it has been received very positively by millers. The feedback we got, for instance, from Njombe. Another aspect is advocacy work. This was through now working with other partners, including government agencies, through the National Food Fortification Alliance, NFFA. And yes, just yesterday I was speaking with Sanku. They are still importing the micronutrients without import duty. And this came through, yes, partners lobbying efforts. At the end of the day, the government agreed that the micronutrients can be imported with waiver of import duty. Another very important aspect on collaboration with LGA, it was a directive from the PRI office that NAFAKA have to sign MOUs with the regions where we implement the fortification of maize flour program. And in Iringa, for instance, in 2018-2019 season, they were third in terms of attaining nutrition scorecard targets. And here they missed some, yes, indicators which of course are not within our capacity, but they were happy to attain this and they shared the certificate. Yes, this MOU is also assigned in Mbeya, Songwe, and in Njombe. So after this slide, I will again welcome Lisa to speak on opportunities for scaling.
Great,
Welcome.
thank you so much, Silas. So hopefully over the last 30 minutes, we kind of left you with the idea that this fortification work has been extremely impactful, and there's a lot of opportunity for this to be continued and to be scaled up. So reflecting on the last 3 years of programming, there are kind of 3 areas that NAFAKA sees as critical for scaling up these efforts. First and foremost, of course, is to increase the adoption of fortification technologies. Without this critical technology, without the models that Sanku is able to promote, we of course are not going to reach critical masses of people consuming maize. So many people in Tanzania are still consuming regular maize flour, but we have the opportunity to increase the access to this technology and have that maize flour fortified. And Sanku will speak on that in a second. We also have the opportunity to support these millers to diversify their marketing strategies. Of course, they can think about their typical marketing opportunities in peri-urban and urban areas, but to also think about ways that they can reach last mile areas, or as well as be connected to some of the social programs, such as the schools or the hospitals. This, of course, is going to be important for broad coverage of the fortification activities, but also it's going to be really important to the sustainable business model and increase revenue for these millers. And alongside all the fortification activities, of course, we see opportunity to continue to implement the SBC activities. We saw that these were important at generating demand and generating acceptability of the fortified maize flour. Before I hand it over to Felix from Sanku, on the SBC piece, NAFAKA, one of the legacy documents we do have is an SBC handbook, which is intended to provide actors working in fortification activities to be able to increase demand for their fortified maize flour via some of these SBC best practices. And so this is really informed from the barrier analysis we did in 2018 and includes some of those key messages, but also includes a lot of learnings about which models, which type of SBC, whether it be radio or SMS, community mobilization, is really important for increasing the demand for this FMF. And this will be available within a week of this webinar, and I'll be able to send it out to anyone registered here with the link for the recording. So with that, I'll hand it over to Sanku.
Great. Elisa, thank you so much. I don't think I'll spend more than a couple minutes because you've done such a good job of describing our work and our model, but I definitely want to say and start off by saying thank you to the government of Tanzania. I'm not sure if Mwita is online, but I would say that Tanzania is definitely a leader in the region of East Africa in fortification, because they're the first country that really saw the gap in fortification, invested and supported the gap. And what I mean by gap is that, you know, no matter how much large-scale fortification is compliant and produces and fortifies, there's a huge majority of the population that doesn't access this centralized processed food, even if it's fortified. So Tanzania was really the forefront, the nation, and still is, in addressing that gap, supporting our work, supporting NAFAKA's work. And so I want to say a big thanks to them. The reason our work is so important, again, is that, you know, 90+% of the population depends on these small mills. And I know we didn't really give a lot of detail about this sector of the milling sector earlier in the call, but picture every village has one small mill, every town might have 10, every city might have a couple hundred, but collectively these small mills feed the entire nation. And so if there's not a fortification strategy or support or enabling environment for these small mills, the most at-risk population, arguably the bottom of the pyramid, the population suffering from micronutrient deficiencies, aren't going to be able to access traditional fortification programs. And so that's why Sanku was invented. And that's what the work that we do and the work with NAFAKA is so critical. And actually, the reason we are in Tanzania is about 8 years ago, Sanku, and I say Sanku, but really me at that time, because there was one person, was invited by USAID to come to Tanzania to test our prototype dosifier, the first dosifier machine. And I presented it to USAID. They got me in front of the president at the time. I presented the machine to the president, and he said, he identified that there was a gap in fortification. He said, put one of these machines in every single village in Tanzania. And since that day, 8 years ago, we've been trying to do that, and we've successfully put machines in 600 mills, reaching 2 million people. A huge chunk of that, obviously, is the partnership with NAFAKA. Huge respect to Jim Flock and Silas and the team. And the picture on the left, that's just one village, one town of the many that we're working with. And it kind of captures the whole story of small-scale fortification, and Sanku being a big part of that. Obviously, you have the machine in the back, that's our dosifier. You have a mother waiting patiently to collect her fortified flour. But most importantly, you have a child. And she's barely 5 years old. And when you think about every single day, almost 9,000 children under the age of 5 die due to micronutrient deficiencies. And she's 5 years old. And the fact that she's eating fortified flour, she's not a statistic, she's a success story. And that's what we want to continue. And when we're looking towards the future, going back to the right on this slide, you know, we are aiming towards, and we're projecting, we're on course to reach 10 million people by 2025 in Tanzania alone. We're launching to Kenya. So all the lessons we learned in this partnership with USAID, NAFAKA, and the government of Tanzania, we're bringing that expertise and that success story, not only scaling throughout Tanzania, but throughout the whole region of East Africa. So Tanzania has put small-scale fortification on the map. Sanku, NAFAKA has continued that. And so I just want to say so much respect to the entire team, everybody on this call. Obviously, none of this could have happened without a collaborative effort, a belief in small-scale fortification, and a belief that good nutrition is essentially a basic human right. So on that note, I'll pass it back to you, and thank you for having me.
Great, thank you so much, Felix. And Luisa, I think you're gonna move us on, right?
Yes, so thank you so much, Felix. Thank you to all of our speakers. I think that clearly we have seen that there's a lot of opportunities for us to continue this work forward. So as I had mentioned during the introduction, we were hoping to have the officer from the President's or the Prime Minister's office. However, it seems that all of our Tanzanian officials are busy with work calls today, so they were not able to make it. But I would like to just highlight some of the contributions that we've seen from the local government. So MWICA and Paul have actually been extremely supportive of NAFAKA's and SANCU's fortification programs from their very beginning. They often attended regional inaugurations and promoted NAFAKA's work to their local respective agencies. So even though they weren't able to join us today, I did want to take a moment to highlight their support and their contribution to making this possible. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and open the floor for a Q&A. So I know that in the chat, there's already been some questions and some answers, but if there's any additional comments or questions, this is a time for us to discuss those. And if you already asked questions but would want to have some additional clarification, please feel free to include those in the chat. And then lastly, I'll go ahead and hand it over to James Flock, our former COP, who will be taking on questions along with our respective speakers.
Thanks. Thanks, Luisa. I've been looking a little bit in the chat box and questions, but I don't know if anyone had any immediate questions or would want to go on mute and ask away and see if either myself or Silas would be able to respond to those.
I can read one off from Glenn. He asked, how dependent is the sustainability of this model on continued micronutrient import waiver? And I think that's probably a good one for Sanku, for Felix.
Yeah, that's a good question. So it definitely helps that we get an exemption and that the government recognizes that nutrition and nutrients, and the premix specifically, is added to the essential medicines list. Is it a make or break if it's exempt? No, we are very much market based. So, you know, we do depend on exemptions and obviously donor funding, but our model mainly, and definitely at scale, relies on the market revenue generated from millers. We sell products to the millers. The millers market for fortified flour or flour in general, that's stable. You know, there's 50 million plus people consuming flour, and the majority, as I mentioned before, 90% plus is produced by small mills. So as long as there's a market for maize flour, there's a mill market to produce that flour. It's a small scale market. We're a solution for that. And yes, our margins get better when we get that exemption, but if we don't get that exemption, it doesn't break our sustainability.
And then actually another one to throw at you right away, Felix, is about the cost of the dosifier machine for local millers. How much does it cost? And is there any financing that Sanku offers to millers, or any other financing that you guys have been able to connect millers with?
That's the first question a miller asks us as well. And I'm not sure if that miller asked that question, but yeah, the miller says, when we show up to a mill and say, do you want to fortify? We're here to support you. The first question they say is, how much is the cost? And the answer is nothing. We are able to get philanthropy. We're able to get grants. NAFAKA, for example, offered grants for that upfront capital, right? For that CapEx cost for the dosifiers. We don't want to put a burden on those millers. They either can't afford it or are unwilling to buy the dosifiers. So we can take care of that. There's enough funding for that. And so right away, that opens up their eyes. They're excited to join the program. The second question a miller will ask after how much does the dosifier cost is, what's the recurring cost? What's this going to cost? How much am I going to have to charge for my flour now to fortify? And so we follow up by saying, we produce this model that essentially neutralizes the ongoing cost, the recurring cost of fortification, offsets the cost of the nutrients that you add to the flour. So that a miller now has a free machine essentially, and now can sell a premium, healthy, arguably life-saving fortified product on the marketplace at the same cost as an unfortified inferior product, requiring no behavioral change. So it's an easy sell to a miller once he understands that. And that's the model we put together. And it took a long, we didn't have that from the start. It took a lot of error learn that. But that's the model that we're moving forward. We're going to try in Kenya and hopefully reach 100 million people one day with that.
Great, thank you. Any follow-up on that, Hayden or Glenn? I know you both answered, he just answered both your questions. All right, and there was a question from Kathy. Harvest Plus has done a lot of work trying to push out fortified seed, iron-rich beans, for example. In NAFAKA's experience, do you think that fortifying the maize post-harvest is a more successful strategy than to change farmer seeds to biofortified? And actually, NAFAKA did some work with biofortification that I'll let Jim, I know you initially messaged back on this, but if you want to give a longer response to it.
Yeah, I mean, we've come across both as ACDIVOCA and under the NAFAKA program, we've come across a lot in terms of the biofortified seed, specifically with maize and being a staple crop and one of the predominant crops in Kenya. The biofortified, it tends to have a different taste quality to it, and it has most of the time it has a different color quality to it. So it is not quite demand driven by the farmers. And so one of the things that also attracted me when I started working with Sanku and understanding more on the fortification work in Tanzania was the taste preferences with the fortified maize flour. There are kind of some cultural barriers or some fake cultural assumptions that the BCC work and the SBC work, Alyssa, you had talked about earlier, we had to overcome, but the taste preferences are no different than what the farmers are growing. So that, to answer the question, is yes, I've found it easier in this market to work directly with the doing the fortification during the flowering stage, during the milling stage, than during the planting stage in terms of increasing availability to it, and also just ability to meet and address some of the farmers' reticence to consume fortified maize flour. So back over to you.
And to add on to that, I think biofortified commodities are, of course, really important. And by working with scaling up iron, biofortified legumes, which NAFAKA did, of course, we're getting that on the market. So I don't think it's one or the other, right? But with the fortification work, it's not just with iron, it's with zinc, vitamin B12, and folic acid as well. So we are able to focus on a few other micronutrients. Cheryl has asked, oh, sorry, whether or not the machine works with other commodities. So Felix.
Yeah, so the DOSFire machine that we invented works with any free-flowing grain or particle. And so, yeah, it could work with millet, sorghum, could even arguably work with rice. And obviously we're working in Tanzania with maize because that's a staple food, but if we were to work in another region, if it was wheat or millet, again, yeah, it would work. And so we just, the machine automatically adjusts for that grain flow, and based on the loss of weight, it doses the premix, whatever country standard that might be added to the DOSFire, it will dose accurately. So it is very, I guess, scalable in that sense, and replicable in different standards in different countries.
And we also have a question about the cost of the micronutrients to the miller specifically. So high level is it doesn't cost anything because they're procuring the micronutrient premix with the bags that Sanku supplies. But if they were to add the micronutrient premix at a posho mill, at that last mile mill where they're not using that bag procurement model, what we did, at least during the Fortification Roadshow, was that cost was passed on to the consumer. So that was 86 cents for 20 kgs of maize. But Felix, if you want to add anything to that.
No, I mean, we've bundled that in. So it's not free to the miller. He's still buying the premix, but he's not feeling that burden because he's buying the flour bags with that price bundled in. So that his cost remains the same, but it's sustainable that our cost for the premix as an organization is being covered by the miller.
All right. Louisa, are you seeing any other questions?
No, I am not seeing any other questions in the chat. I do have, actually, there is one question. So SBCC messages, was it developed based on VA findings? And second, is it possible to have the VA findings?
Yeah, absolutely. So NAFAKA went with a set of core SBC messages about the FMF, and these were informed from the barrier analysis we did in 2018. And I think, like I said on the slide, we found that perceived self-efficacy, access, perceived negative and positive consequences, as well as social norms, were determined to be influential of the consumption of fortified maize flour. And so what we did is we developed messages around those core determinants. And so those were used when we worked with private sector actors about how you can better market your fortified maize flour, or if we were doing any community mobilization, say with those roadshow, those were our core messages. And we are happy to share that barrier analysis with you. It's all ready to go. So maybe next week when I send out the SBC handbook for anyone interested, we can also include that SBC barrier analysis.
Thank you very much. This is Mwivano. Checking on that barrier analysis determinant, how about the policy? The policy, is it influencing the process to be easier? Or if not, what action has been taken by NAFAKA?
So in the barrier analysis, as far as policy at a local consumer level, at that time, it wasn't determined to be a significant determinant. But I'm not sure if you were able to hear from Silas. He did speak about some of the kind of national policies that were affecting the price of the micronutrient during the importation. So a lot of the organizations, including NAFAKA, including Sanku, advocated for that the price of the duty on the fortification, the micronutrient premix, to be eliminated, and it was. Other than that, there are definitely some issues as far as some millers having difficulty in adhering to some of the TBS standards for fortifying maize flour. But as far as the barrier analysis, no, we did not see policy as a critical determinant.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think the right platform that will also be useful to disseminate that barrier analysis will be in the NFFA, so that partners, government could also hear that, and we could have work jointly together to address the issue that it's affecting the issue of fortification in Tanzania.
Absolutely, and that's the point of the SBC handbook is we're hoping to work with local partners and work with anyone working in fortification to leave this kind of legacy document behind, so you're able to continue some of this work. So very happy to share.
Okay, thank you very much, and good work.
Thank you. Luisa, over to you, I think.
All right, well, if we don't have any other final questions or comments, I did, again, just want to take this time to thank you all for allowing us to share these findings with you and be able to connect. We are lucky to have someone from the Prime Minister's office join, making an effort to be here with us despite their busy schedule. So I will go ahead and hand it over to Noel so that he can provide the final remarks. And Noel, I think you might be muted if you are speaking.
Hi, everyone. My name is Abdul, and I'm a program manager for this for Washington, D.C. And I just want to thank everyone for, first of all, for participation in this event and extremely important work that has been done in partnership with Sanko. And I know that this work went through the stages and this final model that's been adopted and it's now ready for adaptation and replication is something that our team tried to present today, which definitely has so many benefits that it's hard to cover in just one presentation. But there'll be more question on this, and just to say that this work will be continued because the initiatives that came out of the project that we hope will also bring some fruits in the future in this regard. So again, thank you everyone for the great work. For the participation and for the leading this discussion. And I hope this work will continue and we'll have more opportunities to discuss and share experiences. Thank you very much.
All right, well, thank you so much, Art. And once again, thank you so much, everyone. We hope that you found this event informative and that it continues our main goal of sustainability. A huge thank you to the USAID Tanzania mission, to Sanku for making this all possible. And we are very excited to continue sharing those analyses with you so that we can continue this good work. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming and staying along for the ride.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your participation and Q&A.
Thank you.
See you soon. See you soon.